Hello everyone, Awesome Andrew here of Awesome Albums. Or am I actually Awesome Andrew? After all, those who saw my Alice Cooper Welcome to My Nightmare video saw me turn to a skeleton before their eyes. How do you know I'm not a lookalike? You know, this reminds me of a story involving the Beatles and a debate that's been going on for over 50 years. Is Paul McCartney dead? Well, why not go ahead and talk about that today? The story is very interesting, describing Paul's death in 1966, and the remaining three Beatles felt guilty about the cover-up that they inserted clues in the album covers and even some of their song lyrics.
Okay, you remember when you were with the Beatles and you were supposed to be dead, and that was a hoax, right?
Yeah, I wasn't really dead.
Right.
Our story, and I'm putting this in quotes, dates back to Wednesday, November 9th, 1966, around 5 o'clock. Supposedly he had an argument with his bandmates before he left that night. While driving, he was in a really nasty car accident, resulting in decapitation. The remaining three Beatles knew what kind of chaos would ensue from their fans if word got out that one of their beloved Fab Four was killed, so they covered it up. It just so happens to be around the same time that they retired from live performances, and by choosing to present themselves with a new image for their new album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself in the story. January 7th, 1967, a rumor started circulating of Paul McCartney's death while driving along the M1 motorway. This one has some truth to it. Paul McCartney's car did have an accident that day, but it was Paul's friend driving it. Paul wasn't even in the car, and nobody died. The rumor lasted a little bit, but died down, no pun intended, for a couple years. Around September of 1969, the Beatles were on the verge of breakup. Paul was feeling isolated from his bandmates. On top of that, John Lennon privately announced that he was leaving the band. There was also issues with the business manager, Alan Klein. A lot of stuff going on, and McCartney retreated to his farm near Campbelltown in Scotland with his wife Linda and their daughters. September 17th, Tim Harper, an editor of the Drake Times-Delphic, the student newspaper in Des Moines, Iowa, published an article titled, "Is Beatle Paul McCartney Dead?", which addressed a rumor being circulated on campus that cited clues from recent Beatles albums. According to music journalist Merrill Noden, this was the first published article on the Paul is dead theory. Harper said, "A lot of us, because of Vietnam and the so-called establishment, were ready, willing, and able to believe just about any sort of conspiracy," end quote. October 10th, the Beatles' press officer Derek Taylor responded to the rumor stating, "Recently, we've been getting a flood of inquiries asking about reports that Paul is dead. We've been getting questions like that for years, of course, but in the past few weeks, we've been getting them at the office and home night and day. I'm even getting telephone calls from disc jockeys and others in the United States," end quote. October 12th, Tom Zarsky, a student at Eastern Michigan University, called Detroit radio station WKNR-FM, telling DJ Russ Gibb about the rumor and its clues. Gibb and other callers then discussed the rumor on air for the next hour, during which Gibb offered further potential clues. 2 days later, October 14th, the Michigan Daily published a satirical review of Abbey Road by University of Michigan by Fred Labor, who had listened to Gibb's show under the headline "McCartney Dead, New Evidence Brought to Light," which identified various clues to McCartney's death on Beatles album covers, particularly Abbey Road. Don't worry, I'll go into more detail on that in a bit. I just want to finish my story first. Labor described the stand-in Paul as an orphan from Edinburgh named William Campbell. Others called him William Shears Campbell, later abbreviating to Billy Shears, who was trained by the Beatles to impersonate McCartney. He went through some minor plastic surgery and was taught by the other three on how to sing like Paul. Merrill Noden later wrote, "Very soon, every college campus, every radio station had a resident expert," end quote. October 19th, WKNR fueled the rumor further with a 2-hour program called The Beatle Plot. The story was soon taken up by more mainstream radio stations in the New York area, WMCA and WABC. Early in the morning on October 21st, WABC DJ Roby Young discussed the rumor on air for over an hour before being pulled off the air for breaking format. Sounds like someone's trying to silence him, if you ask me. At the same time of day or night, WABC's signal covered a wide listening area and can even be heard in 38 U.S. states and, at times, other countries. Beatles' press office denied the rumors. McCartney's atypical withdrawal from public life contributed to the escalation. Vince Gelsa, a student broadcaster in 1969, later said the escalation was indicative of the countercultural influence of Bob Dylan, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, since, quote, every song from them starting about late 1966 became a personal message worthy of endless scrutiny. They were guidelines on how to live your life, end quote. Still, on October 21st, the Beatles press office again denied the rumor, deeming it as a load of old rubbish, which is so British, I love it, rubbish. They also said, the story has been circulating for about 2 years, we get letters from all sorts of nuts, but Paul is still very much with us, end quote. October 23rd, WMCA dispatched Alex Bennett to the Beatles' Apple Corps headquarters in London to further extend his coverage of the theory. Ringo Starr told Bennett, if people are going to believe it, they're going to believe it. I can only say it's not true. In another interview around the same time, John Lennon said that the rumor was insane, but good publicity for Abbey Road, which was very accurate for what they saw in November. October 24th, BBC radio reporter Chris Drake was granted an interview with McCartney at his farm. McCartney said the speculation was understandable, given that he normally did an interview a week to remain in the news. October 26th, part of this interview was broadcast on Radio 4 and subsequently on WMCA in the US. According to John Wynne, McCartney had conceded to the interview in hopes that people hearing his voice would see the light. But that failed. On Halloween 1969, WKBW in Buffalo, New York broadcast a program called Paul McCartney is Alive and Well. Maybe. Which analyzed Beatles lyrics and other clues. The WKBW DJs concluded that the Paul is Dead hoax was fabricated by John Lennon, which we'll never know that. By this time, several record releases had exploited the phenomenon of Paul McCartney's supposed death. Some of these songs were The Ballad of Paul by the Mystery Tour,
As Paul McCartney left this world, as he'd taken his last breath.
Brother Paul by Billy Shears and the All-Americans,
Brother Paul, I'm crying. Are you really lying? Every night and day beneath the cold and lonely stone.
So Long Paul by Worbley Finster, a pseudonym for Jose Feliciano, We're All Pallbearers, Parts 1 and 2 by Zacharias and his Tree People, and St. Paul by Terry Knight, to name a few, which was actually a minor hit in June of that year and was subsequently adopted by radio stations as a tribute to the late Paul McCartney.
Standing by the sea, thinking I was free. Did I hear you call, or was I dreaming then, St. Paul?
In November, Billboard magazine reported that Shelby Singleton Productions planned a documentary LP of radio segments discussing the phenomenon. In Canada, Polydor Records exploited the rumor in their artwork for Bury Together, a repackaging of the Beatles' pre-fame recordings with Tony Sheridan using a cover that shows 4 candles. One of them had just gone out. Also in November, John Lennon's prediction of a good publicity stunt for Abbey Road was realized as Capitol Records sales managers reported a significant increase in sales of Beatles albums attributed to the rumor. Rocco Catena, Capitol's vice president of national merchandising, estimated that this is going to be the biggest month in history in terms of Beatles sales, end quote. The rumor benefited the commercial success of Abbey Road in the US, where it comfortably outsold all the band's previous albums. Also, Sgt. Pepper and Magical Mystery Tour, both of which had been off the charts since February, re-entered the Billboard Top LPs chart, peaking at number 101 and 109 respectively. McCartney was secretly filmed by CBS News crew as he worked on his farm. As in his and Linda's segment in the Beatles promotional clip for Something, which the couple filmed privately around this time, McCartney was unshaven and unusually scruffy looking. His next visitors were a reporter and photographer from Life magazine. He was a little irritated during this encounter, cussing at the visitors and even threw a bucket of water on them and attempted to hit the photographer. Some of this was also captured on film. He wasn't proud of himself in that moment, so he calls them back for a proper interview in exchange for the negatives of the film from that bad day. The family portrait on the front cover shows McCartney not scruffy anymore. He actually is clean-shaven and is casually but nicely dressed. The issue was dated November 7th. Following this issue, the rumor started to die down a bit. McCartney said, "Perhaps the rumor started because I haven't been much in the press lately. I have done enough press for a lifetime, and I don't have anything to say these days. I am happy with my family, and I will work when I work. I was switched on for 10 years, and I never switched off. Now I'm switching off whenever I can. I would rather be a little less famous these days, end quote. November 30th, a television dedicated to Paul is Dead was broadcasted on WOR in New York. It was set in a courtroom, and it was hosted by celebrity lawyer F. Lee Bailey, who cross-examined Fred LeBour and other witnesses, including McCartney's friend Peter Asher and Alan Klein, but he left it to the viewer to determine a conclusion. Before the recording, LeBour told Bailey that his article was a joke, to which Bailey sighed and said, "Well, we have an hour of television to do, you're going to have to go along with this," end quote. December 1st, McCartney returned to London, and with Linda's support, he began recording his debut solo album at his home in St. John's Wood. It was recorded without his bandmates' knowledge and was one of the best-kept secrets in rock history until shortly before its release in 1970. Jump into 1977, LeBour later became co-founder and bassist for the Western swing group Riders in the Sky. In 2008, LeBour said he joked that his success as a musician had extended his 15 minutes of fame for his part in the rumor to 17 minutes. In 2015, he told the Detroit News that he is still periodically contacted by conspiracy theorists who have contacted him with new developments in the conspiracy. In 2016, Beatles biographer Steve Turner said the theory still has the power to flare back into life, end quote. He cited a 2009 Wired Italia magazine article that featured an analysis by two forensic consultants who compared selected photographs of McCartney taken before and after his alleged death by measuring features of his face. Eyes and ears are the most common cited evidence from this, concluding that the man shown in images after November of 1966 was not the same man. This conspiracy opened a whole new can of worms to other conspiracies. There were even a few Beatles-related ones, which I guess I'll go ahead and mention those. First one is everyone but Paul is dead. In this theory, Paul McCartney lives, but the others were the ones that were replaced. Chris Fischel, a student at the University of Virginia, published a theory in 1994 that suggested that Ringo Starr died in 1963, then George Harrison died in 1964, and then lastly John Lennon dying in 1965. Then I guess if you combine this theory with the Paul is dead theory dying in 1966, then all of them are duplicates. Diving down deeper into this hole, you might as well just say that the Beatles never existed, and this has nothing to do with the Yesterday movie that had recently come out. This theory says the members were played by different actors over the years. As described on the website, Dangerous Minds claimed there were never just 4 individual people who were the Beatles. They even said, "This is a serious subject, not a joke, and this site is here to expose the actions of those who exploited these young men and defrauded us, their fans," end quote. And if you haven't rolled your eyes yet, you will on this next theory. The Beatles were created by the Illuminati. I heard your groans. Conspiracy theorist John Coleman believed the Beatles were created by the Illuminati as a way to control middle-class American youth. According to Coleman, the band was used to introduce soft drugs and was a vehicle for the introduction of mind-control trigger words into everyday jargon, end quote. He also said, "I recall very well when the Beatles made their debut on the American rock scene. Their sudden and explosive popularity in America made no sense to me at the time. I couldn't understand what was so great about the Beatles and why they were portrayed as threatening to the crown of then King of Rock and Roll Elvis Presley," end quote. Okay, that one made my head hurt a little bit. But going back to the original theory, Time magazine in 2009 included the Paul is Dead in its feature of 10 of the world's most enduring conspiracy theories. And The Guardian described the hoax as possibly the best-known example of a celebrity being the focus of a, completely unverified, cloning conspiracy theory. And I know that Paul isn't the only one who's been accused of being replaced by a lookalike. Avril Lavigne, anyone? Supposedly she died in 2003 and was replaced by a person named Melissa Vandelia. I could probably keep going down this rabbit hole, but I know you really came here for the evidence on the album covers and the songs. Alright, let's get to it, beginning with the album cover of Help. If you focus on Paul on this album cover, his jacket zips up, like a body bag. The other 3 have button-up jackets. Only issue I have here is this album came out on August of 1965, so Paul would have still been alive. Well, he's still alive, but you get what I mean. Yesterday and Today, Paul is in the center of the album and is covered in meat and decapitated baby dolls, hinting at his accident. Although they're all covered in meat and baby dolls. Naturally, this album was pretty controversial, so they replaced the album cover with this one. Paul's in a suitcase and the other 3 standing around it. Now, if we turn this album on its side, Paul is in a coffin. Ooh, spooky. Just one problem with this one, though. This album came out in June of 1966, which means not dead yet. Revolver, this one's a stretch. He's looking away from you as if he's dead or something. Well, George is the only one looking at you. Although John and Ringo are both looking in Paul's direction, then again, these two do have verified interviews saying it's fake. I didn't find any George interviews, so why are John and Ringo looking at Paul here? Maybe they know something. The problem here is that this album came out in August of '66, so Paul would have still been alive. Next is Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Okay, here's some fun stuff on this one. I'm going to just replay a segment from my Sgt. Pepper Part 1 video because I already mentioned a lot of them already in that video. Now, you could say they grew mustaches because that was the style at the time with the counterculture. You could also say it has something to do with George growing a mustache as part of his disguise when he went to India. Or, if you really want to, you could say it has something to do with Paul growing a mustache to cover up a surgery scar from the winner of the Paul McCartney lookalike contest. People also pointed out how somber the Wax Beatles are, dressed in suits as if they were attending Paul's funeral. Fans also pointed out that guitar on the ground made of flowers, which is positioned how a left-handed person would hold a guitar. Paul is left-handed. Also, if you turn the album counterclockwise, the guitar looks like a P. Looking at real Paul, he's a little bit taller than the Beatles, as if he's floating or something. The hand above Paul's head is often seen as an omen of death. The crazy one that I still don't fully understand, if you take a mirror and put it to the edge of the drum, an arrow will point directly to Paul. The Lonely Hearts will also supposedly say, number 1, number 1, X, he die, I see it. It's a stretch, but I see it. There is also a rumor on that back cover with Paul with his back to you. Now, some new things that have come up since making that video is notice how all the Beatles are turned toward Paul. However, this was only one of many photos from that photo session, often which the band members were rearranged, including John under the hand in the background. There were also hints of Paul was the only one with black instrument. Well, that is also explained in the other photos of him holding different instruments. Something new with the mustaches I forgot to mention, Paul did crash his moped in December of 1965 and suffered from a chipped tooth and a scar on his lip, which led to him wanting to grow out a mustache to cover it up. Or surgery scar from the lookalike. You can decide that for yourself. And going back to the drum, you can look at that as number 1 spelled out 1 and interpret that as 11, as in the 11th month of the year, November. Then the other 1 and the X almost look like a Roman numeral 9, as in November 9th, the day he supposedly died. Well, the main issue there is the English dating system of doing day, month, and year rather than the American system of month, day, and year, which means the drum would say September 11th, which, oh great, some loony is going to say they predicted 9/11 or something, aren't they? Going to the gatefold, it looks like Paul has a patch on his shoulder that says OPD, which stands for Officially Pronounced Dead, the British equivalent to DOA, or Dead on Arrival. However, other photos from that session show that it actually says OPP, the Ontario Provincial Police, although then there is a comeback that says that's what Billy Shears did before replacing Paul. Then going back to the back cover, Paul has his back to you, like I said, but look at George's finger pointing at the lyrics to She's Leaving Home Wednesday morning at 5 o'clock. Supposedly 5 o'clock is when Paul died, not sure whether it's AM or PM. Now, one strong piece of evidence I will give them credit for this conspiracy is November 9th, 1966 did fall on a Wednesday. Oh, man. However, supposedly this is just, again, the favorite from that photo shoot. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any alternate pictures of the back cover. Moving on to Magical Mystery Tour. First off, there is one of them dressed as a black walrus. According to some theorists, the black walrus symbolizes death in certain Scandinavian cultures, and Paul is supposedly the one in the walrus costume standing in a crucifixion pose. Also, if you look at the Beatles' name spelled out, people have interpreted that as a phone number. However, there are some debates on which one is the correct number, or if it's upside down or right side up. The most popular numbers are 834-7132, or upside down 537-1038. Also 231-7036 and 231-7438, which supposedly belongs to a London mortuary. I wonder what happens if I call one of those numbers. Let's try the 231-7438.
I've contacted the M&D Company London Mortuary. John Doe speaking.
Okay. I didn't expect that. Now, one of the other numbers, if you supposedly call on a Wednesday at 5 a.m. or p.m., that you'll get a cryptic message from Billy Shears himself. So, let's try it.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm looking for Billy Shears.
Page 3, 6, 9, 13, 14, 15, 18, 23, and 24. The flock is the hawk, the rock is the chalk. When you find the cheese, it makes you sneeze.
Yeah, that's cryptic. I wonder if he's referring to the booklet that came with the American releases of Magical Mystery Tour. Good thing I have that. So, he mentions page 3. So we see Paul behind a sign that says, I was. Okay, that's freaky. Although the sign actually says, you was. Page 6, we see John selling tickets. Next to him is a sign that says, the best way to go is by M&D Co. By the way, M&D never existed. The whole sign reads M&D Coach, which is briefly visible in the opening scene of the movie where Ringo buys his ticket for the Magical Mystery Tour. Page 9, a little comic section, we look at Paul standing on a hill, a reference to the song Fool on the Hill, but notice the L in hill goes into Paul's head like his head split open or something. Page 13, I see Paul isn't wearing shoes. Supposedly over there, the dead aren't buried with shoes or something. The drum head reads, Love, the Three Beatles. And oh look, his shoes have blood on them? Or is that just red reflecting from the red drum head? Page 14. Okay, we have a hand above Paul's head. Same with 15. And 18. Page 23. Okay, Paul is the only one with a black flower. The other 3 have red flowers. I admit that's kind of odd. Now, Paul did say in the Life magazine interview, I was wearing a black flower because they ran out of red ones, end quote. I can believe that, but A, that's horrible planning on whoever put that shot together, and B, Paul has a bouquet of red flowers, and yet he wasn't allowed to wear one? Sounds fishy to me. And page 24, hand over his head. Moving on to the White Album, there isn't much here because visually there's not much here. But there's a picture that comes with the album, and there's a strange picture of Billy Shears before his surgery. Yellow Submarine, we see another hand, John's hand, above Paul's head. Which, by the way, where did that originate? What culture did the hand behind the head mean death thing start? I'm genuinely curious. Alright, Abbey Road, another fun one. Like what I did with Sgt. Pepper, where I'm going to pull a clip from an old Awesome Albums episode, I'm going to do that here too, and then expand on anything I feel I need to. This is actually a hint at this being their last album, as they are actually walking away from Abbey Road Studios. Another interesting thing here are the clothes that they are wearing. This is all a part of the Paul is dead hoax. This was a hoax that in 1966, Paul McCartney died in a car crash and was replaced with a lookalike. Since then, they placed clues on a lot of their albums to go along with this hoax. The major highlight in this one is the order they walk is a reference to a funeral procession. First we have John Lennon dressed in all white representing a priest. Next we have Ringo, who is in a black suit and is acting as an undertaker, a mourner, whatever you want to call him. And then last we have George Harrison, who's acting as the gravedigger. Now let's go back at Paul. Notice Paul's eyes are closed, and notice how he's walking out a step. He's also barefoot. The dead are not often wearing shoes when they're buried. Paul says that it was hot that day, and so he kicked off his sandals to walk on the hot blacktop. Okay. Also notice the cigarette in his right hand. Paul's left-handed. This is kind of another reference to this being the look-alike and not the real Paul. Another thing with the cigarette is back then they were known as coffin nails. Now zooming out a little bit and let's zoom in on that car. The license plate says 28 if, which interprets to if Paul was still alive, he would have been 28. Although Paul was only 27 when the album was released, so that license plate was a little inaccurate. Turning the album over, we have a few more hints. A Grim Reaper appearing in the shadows? What about the girl running away? Why is she running away? Is she running to get some help? Or is she fleeing the scene? Now, the only thing I want to expand on here is going back to the Volkswagen. For one, this wasn't even intended to be in the shot. They tried contacting the owner to move it, but there wasn't enough time since this photo shoot was holding up traffic. We all know the 28 if, but I didn't realize that the LMW was taken to mean Linda McCartney Weeps, but that I on the license plate was actually a 1, supposedly. Paul, with a sense of humor, released a live album in 1993 simply called Paul is Live and parodied the Abbey Road album cover, complete with a Volkswagen that says 51 is, as in Paul is 51. Well, he was in 93. Which is great, returning to the Abbey Road album cover and poke fun at some of the rumors of his supposed death. I love it. Then looking at the Beatles' last released album, Let It Be. Notice how somber everyone is. Well, George is smiling, but everyone else is a little somber looking. Everyone is also looking away, except Paul, who is looking right at you. And notice he has a red background. Red, like blood? I don't know. And last picture I want to show, not an album cover, but if you look at the Life magazine front cover and hold it up to a strong light, you can see a car ad on the other side. Okay, they did that on purpose. They had to have done that on purpose. And in the last section, I want to talk about some of the evidence that is found in the songs. Listening to the tail end of Sgt. Pepper title track, we hear them announce Billy Shears. Paul told Rolling Stone in 1974 that it was simply a rhyme for years. Ringo's Billy Shears, definitely. That was just in the production of Sgt. Pepper. It just happened to turn out that we dreamed up Billy Shears. It was a rhyme for years, band you've known for all these years, and here he is, the one and only Billy Shears. We thought that's a great little name. It's an Eleanor Rigby type name, a nice atmospheric name, and it was leading into Ringo's track. So as far as we're concerned, it was purely and simply a device to get the next song in, end quote. Ringo also claims to be Billy Shears in his solo song, I'm the Greatest.
Yes, my name is Billy Shears. You know it has been for so many years.
Wednesday morning at 5 o'clock as the day begins.
I know I already mentioned it, but 5 o'clock is supposedly the time of Paul's crash, and November 9th, 1966 did fall on a Wednesday.
He blew his mind out in a car. He didn't notice that the lights had changed.
Yeah, this one's been debunked. Yes, it's a car accident, but it's not about Paul, it's about Tara Brown, heir to the Guinness fortune. More information on that in my Sgt. Pepper video. The end of the song, there is a segment of a BBC broadcast of the Shakespeare play King Lear, which John Lennon heard when he turned on the radio while they were working on the song. He decided to mix bits of the broadcast into the song, resulting in some radio static and disjointed bits of dialogue. The section of King Lear used came from Act 4, Scene 6, which Oswald says, "Slave, thou hast slain me, villain, take my purse," which comes in at the 3:52 mark, and then we hear some dialogue saying, "I know thee well, a serviceable villain, as duteous to the vices of thy mistress as badness would desire." What? Is he dead? Sit you down, father, rest you. I don't know why I had my finger up like this the whole time. That's due to drama or whatever. Yeah, that just so happens to be the segment that they put into the song. Also, still on the subject of this song, if you play the song backwards, you can hear... Paul is dead, ha ha. Okay. You can hear John saying something at the end of Strawberry Fields Forever. It sounds like he's saying, "I buried Paul," but he's actually saying, "cranberry sauce." Why he's talking about cranberry sauce, I don't know.
Wednesday morning papers didn't come.
Paul is singing that the Wednesday papers didn't come, as if the Beatles were trying to hide the news of Paul's death on Wednesday, but wouldn't that be on Thursday, because news that happened on Wednesday wouldn't have had time to be put in the Wednesday paper, as the paper would have already been done printing and would have been on delivery, so it wouldn't have been covered until the Thursday paper.
Well, here's another clue for you all. The walrus was Paul.
Ian MacDonald said in his book Revolution in the Head that the Beatles were partly responsible for the phenomenon due to their incorporation of random lyrics and effects, particularly in Glass Onion, in which Lennon invited clue hunting by including references to other Beatles songs. MacDonald groups it with the psychic epidemics that were encouraged by the rock audience's use of hallucinogenic drugs that escalated with Charles Manson's homicidal interpretation of the White Album in Mark David Chapman's religious-motivated murder of John Lennon in 1980. Now, going back to the lyrics.
Well, here's another clue for you all. The walrus was Paul.
This is again a reference to the Scandinavian symbol of death. However, if you look at the music video of I Am the Walrus, you'll find that John was the walrus, not Paul. John mentioned in his 1980 Playboy interview that he wrote that because he felt guilty choosing Yoko over Paul. Also, this song was written in 1968, a year before the rumor was popular.
You were in a car crash and you lost your hair.
This one's pretty self-explanatory. Car crash, lost your hair. Well, he lost his whole head, not just his hair, but whatever. There is what appears to be a hidden message in this song. I even talked about this in my backward messages video, but he's actually saying, Monsieur, Monsieur, how about another one? I have a bad French accent.
Find me in my field of grass.
This line is a reference to a cemetery, supposedly.
Number 9, number 9, number 9, number 9, number 9.
Probably the most disturbing, whatever you call this, I've ever heard, forward or backward, but some lyrics, putting this in quotes, from backwards is of course the iconic but other things you can hear in the song is there's screaming as if there's a burning car and... Okay, moving on.
And so I quit the police department.
I guess that's the last one I'm talking about. The lyrics of So I Quit the Police Department is supposedly a reference to Billy Shears, who allegedly had a former career as a police officer in Ontario, Canada, which seems to wrap up the entire conspiracy into one nice little statement. And there you have it. The Paul is dead conspiracy. Do I believe it? No. I think it's stupid, and there are way too many facts that are debunked by logic, and the few instances left are just mere coincidence. However, it is still a fun story to read up on, and the detail that they put into the story is absolutely fascinating. Reading and hearing some of this blew my mind several times. What? November 9th fell on a Wednesday? No way! The Magical Mystery Tour phone number? That is so cool. There are a lot of interesting pieces of evidence in the album covers and the music, and I guess it's up to you if you believe, is this a conspiracy or not? Just like it's up to you, do you believe that I'm actually sitting in this chair or not? Am I still alive? Or did I die last year in the Welcome to My Nightmare video? We'll never know. I'll see you next time. Our story, I'm going to be using quotes a lot in this video, and I'm putting this in... Oh. I mentioned that in my script. I wasn't even reading my script there, but sure enough, our story, and I'm putting that in quotes, drawing attention to the quotes, dates back to November 9th. Our story, and I'm putting this in quotes, dates back to Why do I keep saying February? Our story, and I'm putting this in quotes, dates back to February 9th. I keep saying February. It's not... February's not in this at all. According to John Wynne, McCartney had... Who's John Wynne? Which was actually a minor hit in the June... In the June? With a Volkswagen that says... That's what it says.
Oh, I'm gonna get my tea. Hold on. Alright, you ready?
Yep.
Hello? You have reached the... Are you recording still?
Yep.
Alright. Hello? You have reached... I keep wanting to say you have reached. Hold on. I'll do it again. I am like a pooping. This is my poop voice. I have a poop. This is my poop voice. My British poop voice. Here we go. Hello. You have contacted the M&D Company London Mortuary. John Doe speaking. That's so animated.